Hi, this is Skip Stewart, Vice President and Chief Improvement Officer for Baptist Memorial Healthcare. This is the fourth and final video that is a part of a Improvement Kata workshop. A kata is a routine you practice, so its pattern becomes an automatic habit that gives you some new skills. So if we're going to learn what we call the four-step improvement kata model, we're going to have to practice. And we have people all throughout Baptist at different disciplines, at different levels, learning how to practice this four-step improvement kata model as they experiment their way forward to achieving great goals. So here's the four-step improvement kata model. One thing to bring attention to is it is a very iterative process. Important step number one, challenge. A challenge is a strategic imperative. It's a game changer. It's not what we can work on, it's what we must work on. Many times it's a multifaceted type of goal. It's typically 52 weeks out into the future. Now each step is going to frame the next step. Important step number two, current condition. Where are we at today in light of the 52-week challenge? Important step number three, next target condition. The word next there implies that there will be multiple target conditions on your way to the challenge. So if the challenge is 52 weeks into the future, next target condition is typically about 2 weeks into the future. Important step number four, PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust. Or you can think of the word experiment. We are going to experiment through one obstacle at a time on our way to the target condition. And we've referred to this as a meta routine that stays the same regardless of the circumstances, a routine way of acting and thinking. Now, if we're going to turn these four steps into reality, into the way that we act and think, we're going to have to practice. Important step number one, challenge. Important step number two, current condition. Important step number three, next target condition. Important step number four, PDSA. And there's three things we want to bring attention to. You cannot reach the overall challenge right away. The path to the target condition is not predictable or straight. And as we move towards the next target condition by experimenting against one obstacle at a time, we're making adjustments based on what we learn. Now, this four-step improvement kata model is not difficult. It's just not our natural way to think and act. Our default is to jump to conclusions. So to operationalize this, we have to have good coaching. And we'll talk much more about the coaching kata in the workshop. We've talked much about this phrase, pattern of work. And one of the things I've suggested is that as you watch athletics, you're watching the players play the game. You might even notice that some of the players have unique traits and features and characteristics which are different from other players playing the same game on a different team maybe. Maybe the coach will draw a picture of how the team is playing the game today. They may draw another picture of how they desire the team to play the game in the future. So that's one way to think about that. In your work, you can think about what is the current way that you're doing things. We've talked much about experiments, or what we called PDSA, important step number four. There are three types of experiments that we'll talk about in the workshop: go and see, hypothesis testing, and exploratory experiments. We'll talk much more about that in the workshop. What are we experimenting against? We are experimenting against obstacles, but to be specific, we are experimenting against one obstacle at a time that's in front of the target condition, desired pattern of work. Important step number one, challenge. It has 4 key points. Key point number one, date and distant future. Key point number two, desired pattern of work. Key point number three, metrics. Key point number four, start with one focused process. Important step number two, 5 key points. Key point number one, actual pattern of work now. Key point number two, process characteristics now. Key point number three, current process metrics now. Key point number four, current outcome metrics now. And key point number five, understanding linkage of outcome metrics, focus process, and challenge. Important step number three, next target condition. It has 5 key points. Key point number one, date in near future. Key point number two, desired pattern of work. Key point number 3, process characteristics. Key point number 4, process metrics. Key point number 5, outcome metrics. Important step number 4, PDSA. It has 4 key points. Key point number 1, against one obstacle of target condition, desired pattern of work. Key point number 2, list what is expected to happen. Key point number 3, list what actually happened. Key point number 4, reflect what did you learn. Let's go into some of the reasons for the key points. Important step number 1, challenge. Key point number 1, date and distant future. The reason is so that we know the arrival time long term. Key point number 2, desired pattern of work. The reason is we want to know how we need to play the game to win. Key point number 3, metrics. The reason is so that we can establish and measure the gap from the current condition to the challenge. Key point number 4, start with one focus process. The reason is to help narrow our focus and see obstacles more clearly. Important step number 2, let's look at the reasons. Key point number 1, actual pattern of work now. The reason is we want to understand how the game is being played today. Key point number 2, process characteristics now. The reason is we want to understand those sources of variation and opportunities for standardization in the working pattern. Key point number 3, current process metrics now. The reason is we want to understand key effects of the experiments on process metrics, leveraging or driving the outcome metrics. Key point number 4, current outcome metrics now. The reason is to establish and measure the gap from the target condition to the current condition. And then finally, key point number 5, understand linkage of outcome metrics, focus process, and challenge. The reason is to ensure efforts are directional. Important step number 3, next target condition. Key point number 1, date in near future. Reason is we want to know the arrival time short term. Key point number 2, desired pattern of work. The reason is how we want to play the game by the target condition date. Key point number 3, process characteristics. The reason is we want to define the factors that will enable the target condition working pattern consistently. Key point number 4, process metrics. The reason is to identify levers to produce the outcome metrics. Key point number 5, outcome metrics. Reason is confirmed arrival. Important step number 4, PDSA. There's 4 key points. Key point number 1, against one obstacle of target condition desired pattern of work. The reason is to help narrow the focus of what's preventing the target condition desired pattern of work. Key point number 2, list what is expected to happen. The reason is to understand the process behavior. Key point number 3, list what actually happened. See, the reason here is we want to determine prediction confirmation or prediction error. Key point number 4, reflect what did you learn. The reason is to uncover deeper obstacles and examine our thinking. As we practice this 4-step improvement kata model that we call a meta routine, we'll start to develop neural pathways in our brain, or as the neuroscientists like to say, every time you think or do something, you are more likely to do it again because it writes and strengthens neural pathways. And we have people all throughout Baptist learning how to think scientifically. So until next time, show me your thinking.